Okay. Okay, good. How's everyone? Okay, so we in class have just been talking about the group projects, and a number of people have accomplished their interviews. Others are not yet. So let's just see how are people doing with this. So let's see, Jack, have you and Sana managed to track down Henry Lee?
Sorry?
Have you and Sana managed to track down Henry Lee? I think I put my mic on.
I haven't, no.
Yeah, okay. Let's see then. Let's see. Amelie, you are in the, let's see. Amelie, who are you interviewing? I'm sorry, I don't see you on my list. Byron Rushing, Frida Garcia. Have you found them yet?
No, we haven't talked to them yet.
Okay.
But we're trying to this week or when.
Okay. Okay. And let's see, Seth and Lily are on the trail of Vivian Lee along with Amber. And let's see, anyone else here? And Pablo, how did your interview with Billy Evans go?
Hi, Mr. Allison. It was good. It was good. We had a lot of fun.
Very good. He's a good guy. Okay, good.
Yeah.
And yes.
He told me that you're a trader because you moved to West Boston.
East Boston. Okay, yes.
East.
Well, I'm glad he's not taking it personally. But he talked to you anyway. Good. And let's see, anyone else? Sonia, you guys are doing Dusty Roads. Have you tracked down Dusty yet?
Yes, we interviewed her.
Oh, good. How'd it go?
It was very interesting.
Good, good. She is an interesting person. Good. Okay, so the rest of you, as I'm sure you're aware, the semester is drawing to a close. So I know this is something that should be high on your to-do list. And if you have any questions, concerns, let me know, okay? And where did we leave anything? Do you have any questions, concerns that I can help you with?
Professor?
Yes, Kathleen.
I was wondering, when is the last day you're willing to take any work?
That is a very good question. And it's kind of ominous that you're asking it right now. Does it say on the syllabus? Anyone look that far ahead? I know the semester began a long time ago and it seemed like we had all the time in the world. And now suddenly it is drawing to a close, and that is okay. So our final exam is scheduled for May 11th. So why don't we say, and what day of the week is that? That's a Tuesday. I have to turn in grades on May 13th, which is Thursday. So I would like things as close to May 11th as you can get them. I mean, grades are due at noon on the 13th. So if if you say, gee, can I give you something at 11 o'clock in the morning? I would say probably not. So May 11th, we'll just say May 11th, put that in your heads, turn everything in, and okay. Thanks for asking, Kathleen.
Thank you for answering.
And if for some reason you are not able to finish all of your work, and if you have submitted a significant amount of work, you can get an incomplete, which will give you additional time. I don't recommend people do this because usually what happens is people who get an incomplete often just don't finish, and then the grade turns into an F after a year. If you are having some problems and have not been able to submit any work, let me know now. I mean, not right this minute, and we can discuss what you might be able to do, okay? Because I don't want you, to have the idea that you can just get it incomplete and then, at some future date, turn everything in, because actually my experience has been that never happens. I know, but I understand people have lives, been a troubling time for many people, so I can see what we can do. Okay, so that's where we are. So the two outstanding assignments we have coming in are the Boston monuments and then the eminent Bostonian. And the Boston Monument is no longer an audio video. Well, it is an audio video. That is, I want you to take pictures or make a video telling us the significance of the monument and post it on the blog. You don't have to do the 3D piece of it. And so that is coming up. The due date for that is this Thursday. And then the eminent Bostonian, and that is due on the 11th. Okay, along with anything else that's outstanding. And I look forward to reading it. Are there any other questions, or does that thoroughly confuse people, disappoint, depress people, thinking of all you have to do for this class when you would rather be doing things for, I don't know. Every professor always assumes that his or her class is the most important thing, not only in your classes, but in your life. So just keep that in mind as you're making your way through college. Okay, didn't mean to come down so hard on that. Any other questions pertaining to the structure of the class, work you have to do? Okay. Where did we leave off last time? I realize it's been a while. And we had Patriots Day in the meantime. Anyone at home remember what we were talking about last time?
The last thing I remember, we were talking about James Michael Curley.
Okay. Good, James Michael Curley. Yes, Amber, were you raising?
We talked about the Navy ships in Boston during the First World War.
Navy ships in Boston, okay. First World War, James Michael Curley, this is good. And by the way, in the class, James Michael Curley is always a safe answer for what we've been talking about. He does loom large in Boston history. And also, I'm glad you mentioned the Navy, because it really is one of the reasons Boston doesn't go completely bankrupt sooner is because of the First and Second World Wars. I think I mentioned during most of the 20th century, Boston is in a depression. Most of the industries have left, and there's no real there here. So it's unclear, and think about it. Major cities today, which once were thriving, are in tough shape. In 1950, Boston was one of the most depressed cities in the country. Boston could not borrow money. Its bond rating was B something, which is very bad for bond. Bonds are ways cities borrow money. They issue bonds, which investors then buy, hoping then to get a return on their investment. And cities do this, all kinds of governments do this, issue bonds that people buy, and then the bonds will give you, a return on the investment. But no one wanted to buy Boston's bonds because Boston seemed to be in a state of decline, and the expectation was Boston would never be able to pay this back. So Boston, state of decline. On the other hand, the wealthiest industrial city in the world was Detroit. You just think about this. 60 years, 70 years ago, Boston and Detroit were polar opposites. Now, of course, today, Boston is booming, and Detroit has been in really a steady decline for a variety of reasons since the 1960s. So other industrial cities too have similar things. Cities really are organic entities. They can have periods of civic health and then things go bust, or vice versa. There are all kinds of cities which once were very prominent and prosperous, which no longer are, and then other places which have really risen in the last 40 years, 50 years. places you wouldn't have expected. You know, air conditioning is one of the real reasons why places like Phoenix and Los Angeles and Miami and Tampa and Orlando are able to compete. But they have other things that keep people coming to them for a variety of reasons. And the big question then is, what does Boston have? Why has Boston rebounded over the last 70 years? And it's a big story. And I'll try to suggest some reasons right now. Does anyone have any ideas before I start telling you what I think? No one at home have any ideas? What is responsible for Boston's fiscal, financial health?
Nowadays?
Yes, nowadays.
Well, isn't Boston, the Boston area, like the biotech, like?
So, okay, very good. Yeah, biotech, big thing in Boston now. And of course, good. Anyone else have a suggestion? Thought? Okay. We'll come back to this then, because this is the big thing. By the way, I'm thinking maybe I should have a final exam. This would be a great final exam question, wouldn't it? And so far, Henry would be the only one answering it. So even better. Let me just see if my PowerPoint works so that I can show this to those of you watching from the comfort of your home. Okay, so, and the rise of a biotech industry, which, by the way, in 1950, no one knew would exist, owes its place in Boston to a couple of things. And one is higher education. That is, the thing you are all involved in right now has its root, is really one of the things responsible for Boston's revival. Here, I showed you last time this very, one of my favorite pictures. This is from the Suffolk Archives, and it is Congressman Kennedy with, I think it's William Burse, who was the president of Suffolk, might be Robert Muntz, who was also the president of Suffolk, and Carol Sheehan, who was a guy from Dorchester. And as you can see, Carol Sheehan goes off to war, and because of the GI Bill, goes to college. Now, for Boston, the GI Bill is a very important thing. Actually, for America, it's a very important thing because people who served in the armed forces can get a college degree. I know I probably talked about this last time. I will mention it again because it bears repeating. You have a college education now available to millions of young men and hundreds of thousands of young women who also served, who then can get a college education. So instead of becoming a steam fitter, a longshoreman, a carpenter, a plumber, a sheet metal worker, you can become an accountant or a lawyer or a doctor or something else. The effect of the GI Bill overall was to change the American economy from a blue-collar manufacturing economy to a white-collar managerial economy. That's part of the change. The second is this, you know, Sheehan, probably born in the 1920s or so. He comes home from the war, I suspect got married after the war, and probably had children who were growing up in the 1960s, 1970s. If your parents went to college, by the way, who here's parents went to college? Two people. Anyone at home? Parents go to college? You don't need to identify yourselves. It's one of the questions the dean told me to stop asking. If your parents went to college, the expectation is you're going to go to college too. So it's going to have that transformative effect. Plus, we do have, after 1945, an increase in the American population through birth of children. In the 1930s, for the first time in American history, the population didn't grow by any big numbers because of the Depression. After 1945, the population does, what is called the baby boom, between about 1945 and early 1960s, 1960 or so. So you have a period where there are more children being born. I have to tell you, this is part of the generation to which I belong, and I really am thoroughly sick of the baby boomers. I know you'll all be happy when we're gone, and I don't blame you. As a cohort, we've done tremendous amount of damage to the world. So I'm not apologizing, I'm just pointing it out. So just keep that in mind. I don't know, what generation are you?
Gen Z.
You're Gen Z. And what's significant about Gen Z?
After 9/11.
Okay, so you're born after September 11th. Anything else? I mean, and,
Technology.
excuse me?
Technology.
You use a lot of technology, okay. More prevalent mental illness, even than baby boomers?
No, I'm just saying it's like awareness, I guess.
Awareness of mental illness, of
Anxiety mostly.
anxiety, okay, okay. And what do you, I mean, I'm not asking, and it's unfair because only Henry and Amber are here directly to answer. I'm hoping people at home can also think of reasons for this. Is it because all the generations preceding you are giving you all these anxieties, or is it something else? It's because,
I think that now it's more comfortable to talk about mental illness. Before, mental illness was considered like something to not be talked about because it was a taboo, and it's no longer become a taboo. It becomes a norm.
okay, so people can talk about it, and thus it seems more prevalent.
Also, and I feel like education prices for higher education is at like an all-time high. as
Yes.
well. And there's like a constant like demand to figure out what you're going to do.
Yes, okay, that's true. The second part, I think, has been true for a long time. Yes, Seth.
I was gonna say, I don't think it's just an awareness about mental illness or a comfort in talking about it. I think it's also sort of a societal, amongst young people, a societal fear about the future. And because we don't really have a bright outlook towards the future, there are a lot of things that are looming in our future, like what's it called? The likelihood that we will be less well off than our parents.
Yes,
And
definitely
climate
that.
change. Basically those two things.
Okay, yeah, because your parents, their parents, and probably their parents, I'm losing track of what generations, did their best to screw things up for you. And so you have, and the fact you mentioned, I can't remember now whether it was you or Henry, you mentioned the cost of higher education, which means you have to pay a lot in order to get to the same position you think your parents would have been at when they were your age. And so you have, let me just tell you, I think higher education, maybe I should turn the microphone off, it's a racket. And one thing that's happened is we have this expectation that you have to go to college. Colleges know that. And the federal government said, okay, because we saw what a great thing the GI Bill was, we will give loans to people to make sure they go to college. So you're borrowing money to get something that might not be worth as much as it was for your grandparents to get a college degree. I mean, look, Carol Sheehan goes from, I don't know what he would have done. I know a lot of other people who benefited from the GI Bill who would have been, carpenters, longshoremen, steam fitters, dock workers, and instead become lawyers, doctors, accountants, and so on. So there is that transformation, and then it becomes diminishing returns after that. So I don't know what to tell you. Here you are. You're paying, okay, and then it's a double whammy. Right now, you are paying me, as well as an educational apparatus, and you're going to be paying for my retirement and the retirement of lots of other people. Fewer of you than there are of old people who are going to be demanding Social Security. And whenever there's any thought of, gee, we have to do something about Social Security, all the old folks like me come out of the woodwork saying, hands off my Social Security. What you should say is, what about my Social Security? Who is going to be paying for your retirement? And probably you're not going to be able to retire. Boy, I hate to get onto this depressing note because I was promising you an upbeat class where we would talk about how Boston is transformed after the Second World War. Let's get back to that because otherwise you'll be paying for my retirement sooner than you expected. So let's see. Okay, so maybe it's not going to work after all. Okay, so getting back to higher education. As you're probably aware, in 1636, the first college in British North America opened, and that, of course, was Harvard, originally the College of New England. And college was not for everybody. The GI Bill, and then what happens subsequently, does make college something for everybody. Probably about 1 of every 100 people of college age would go to college. It really was a place to train ministers, or then as now, if your family had means, they might send you to college. And this is the way it was for most of our history. The first school in Boston, anyone remember what the first school in Boston was? This would be another good final exam question. Here or at home?
Are you joking about the final exam question, or should we honestly prepared for that?
Boy, now, so since we were just talking about the anxieties you are under, let's say, no, we're not going to have a final exam, Kathleen. So yes, I am joking. And by the way, Kathleen, we don't get any background noise from you, so don't worry about it. You can keep talking. Okay, so no final exam, but still I have the question. First school in Boston. Oldest public school in the country. It is Boston Latin. And Boston Latin taught young men Latin so that they could then go to college, because the entrance exam to get into Harvard into the 19th century was being able to read Latin. Okay, so we have this one college because a very small segment of the population is going to be going to college. And can anyone tell me what is the second college in Boston? Well, okay, we'll say Metropolitan Boston. See, no one can. It is Tufts, founded in 1852. College in Medford, very much like Harvard in its outlook. And then the third, Henry, do you have any guess what the third might be? No. What was your first guess?
Oh, Boston.
Boston College, yes. Up first, Mass College of Pharmacy. We'll get to Boston College in a bit. Again, Tufts, another school for people who, I'm not quite sure why, liberal arts college. And then we have the Mass College of Pharmacy and Health Science, a school to train pharmacists. Harvard had a medical school as of about 1818. And you didn't have to go to college in order to become a doctor, nor did you have to go to college in order to become a lawyer. Those were considered trades or professions and not what you would need a college degree for. So pharmacy, yeah, you do need to get some training in that. And then the next one, I'm going to stop picking on poor Henry, who keeps guessing and keeps being wrong. The next one is the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in, I think, 1862 or so, started to train engineers. So you can see, 1636, there is a college. And then beginning in 1852, over the next 10 years, we have 3 more colleges starting. And then in 1863, Boston College, yes. And Boston College, of course, is a Catholic college. It's not the first Catholic college in New England, That was the College of the Holy Cross out in Worcester. Yeah, but again, Harvard was a school trained to train congregational ministers, and Boston College, school for Catholics. By the way, all of these colleges are all men for a long time. And then next, the New England Conservatory started in the 1870s. Again, Boston has a lot of musicians, and I think last time I talked about the symphony orchestra. So conservatory, school to train musicians, and then Boston University, and that is 1839 or so. Actually, Boston University was started up in New Hampshire. So it traces its origins to a Methodist college started in New Hampshire that moved to Boston after the Civil War. And in fact, it opened up on Beacon Hill before it moved out to the shores of the Back Bay. And then next we have, okay, the Boston Normal School, as it had been, which is a school to train teachers, now UMass Boston. And then Emerson College started in 1880 by a guy named Emerson. And its real focus was teaching public speaking. You can see it says expression necessary to evolution. By the way, it was not the only school of public speaking in Boston. This is a very important, why would anyone need to learn public speaking?
If you want to be a politician.
If you want to be a politician, very good thing. Well, you need to be able to talk clearly, but would people other than politicians benefit from a school of public speaking?
Yeah, especially if you're like a preacher.
If you're a teacher, yes. Anyone else? Professors, yeah. You know, so far you're identifying a relatively small group. I don't know how many of you want to become politicians or teachers or professors. Now that I've shown you how easy it is to be a professor, maybe you're thinking that's for me. Anyone else? Ministers, certainly. Okay, here you can,
Actors.
excuse me?
Actors. I know Emerson is an
Actors,
artist.
yeah. Okay, actors, yeah. It's useful to be able to communicate. And here you can see expression necessary to evolution. So certainly they're selling themselves as something more than just, if you want to be an actor, this is where to go. Okay, so Emerson, there were others, the Scaly School of Public Speaking and others. The Mass College of Art, train artists. And also the school at the Museum of Fine Arts. The Museum of Fine Arts was really started with an education component. And there's Emerson again. And Northeastern, 1893. Northeastern grows out of the YMCA. And the YMCA had kind of a mission to, one of the big things happening in Boston in the 19th century is an immense tide of immigration. And some of these schools, Emerson being one, and Northeastern being another, are really hoping to help immigrants learn how to communicate and learn how to fit into American society. Northeastern has actually faculty from Harvard Law School will venture into Boston, to the area around Huntington Avenue, to the YMCA, to teach classes on the law. And the idea is not that the people taking our classes will become lawyers. The idea really is these immigrants will learn about the law and they'll stop breaking the law if we only teach them what the law is. The idea is not that these immigrants are going to become lawyers, but they're going to stop breaking the law. Okay, and you can see their motto: light, truth, virtue, all good things. And then Simmons College, actually was a women's college and really to train teachers and others. You know, the Boston Normal School was to train teachers, so was Simmons. Simmons, of course, is still in operation. Now it is Simmons University. And then the Wentworth Institute of Technology in 1904, another engineering school, as MIT by this time, well, MIT moves out to Cambridge in the 19-teens. It had been in the Back Bay since the 1860s. But again, a school to teach engineers, something you certainly need a lot of. And then, of course, in 1906, what school is this? Good final exam question. What Boston institution of higher learning was founded in 1906?
Suffolk University.
Suffolk University. Thank you. Good, good, good. And this was started again as a law school. But unlike Northeastern's idea for a law school, Suffolk was going to teach immigrants the law so that they could become lawyers. And the guy, who is the founder of Suffolk? See, it would be unfair for Henry and Amber to do what I usually do when I have a classroom filled with people who can't answer this question, which is to throw my pen at them to get them to say what the answer is. Do you think you'll regain the sight in that eye? Okay, so.
It didn't start with a G.
It does not start with a G. Well, the first name does start with a G. Yes, Jack. So does that help you, Kathleen?
Gleason?
Archer Senior, by the way. Sorry.
Gleason. That's the first name.
Yeah, I only remember the first name.
Archer Senior.
Archer, Gleason Archer, thank you. And Gleason Archer had gone to Boston College Law School, became a lawyer, and then decided what he wanted to do was open his own law school, which he did initially in his apartment in Roxbury. And so it is a law school, not a college. Later on, in the 1930s, when the Massachusetts legislature says, in order to become a lawyer, you need a college degree, Suffolk adds a college. Okay, let's see, what other colleges do we have here? Emmanuel College, another Catholic school actually for women, and started in the first decade or so of the century. And then here we have Berkeley, the Berkeley College of Music, started by a guy named Lee Burke. Actually, his son's name was Lee, and he names it for his son, if I'm understanding the story correctly. Another school for music. So you have two schools for music in Boston, Berkeley and the conservatory. And then here we have Brandeis, started after the war out in Waltham, named for a Boston guy who was a justice on the Supreme Court. And Brandeis started as a school for Jewish students. Jews had been discriminated against for admission to other colleges like Harvard. And so you have the creation of Brandeis as a school for Jewish students. Now you don't have to be Jewish to go to Brandeis, just like, and Jews are not as discriminated against in college admissions as they once were. There's a story about the president of Harvard early in the century talking about why he didn't want to admit more Jewish students. And he said, 50% of all of the thieves we have caught stealing books from the Harvard libraries are Jewish. That sounds really ominous. Like half of the book thieves. Do you know how many book thieves they had caught stealing books from the Harvard library? 2. 50% of them were Jews. Okay, so that was President Lowell. And so Brandeis started as a school for Jewish students who were denied admission to Harvard or the other prestigious schools. So I don't know, I've lost track of how many schools there are here, but the point of this story isn't to show you all of the schools, but to point out this is really unusual for any American city to have this many colleges. Most cities will have a college, if that, possibly two, okay? And it's something that cities have. They have a college. Boston has, I've lost count, more than a dozen. In fact, the metropolitan area of Boston has about 60 or so colleges. And then you don't have to go far to go to Providence, Southern New Hampshire, other places that have colleges. So we have colleges, and now we have the federal government, which is going to pay returning soldiers, sailors, Marines who want to go to college. And we see actually all over the country, the educational bureaucracy, the educational institutions really proliferate. Suffolk, just to use Suffolk as an example again, as I said, started a college in the 1930s in order to prepare people to go to law school, because the legislature said in order to go to law school, you need a college degree. And the trustees of Suffolk said, that's really going to hurt us, because most of the people coming to law school now don't have college degrees, so they started a college. And the college didn't really do that well. I should tell you that for most of Suffolk's history, there has been tension between the law school and the college, as for a variety of reasons at the time. Since we are here in the law school, I don't want to say this too loudly, but the law school has sometimes looked at the college as the unwanted stepchild, and sometimes the college has felt itself the unwanted stepchild. But, yes, Amber. Okay. I thought you're going to go tell the dean of the law school what I've been saying. So anyway, during the war, of course, most of the eligible college-age students were away at war. So there isn't a whole lot going on in colleges. And the trustees of Suffolk said, we should really close the college because it's a big drain. On the other hand, other trustees say, well, wait a minute, the federal government's going to pay people to go to college. Maybe we should actually expand the college, and they do. So the GI Bill not only transforms higher education, transforms American economic life, it also saves Suffolk University and the college, which allows us all to be here. So, big thing. So you now have these colleges are going to flourish through the end of the 1940s because of the GI Bill, and then by the end of the 1950s, because the children of the returning veterans now having a middle-class life have the expectation of going to college. Okay, any questions on this? I fear I've just gone off onto a lot of tangents and okay. Well, let us see. What is our next piece of the puzzle? Well, big piece of it is the retirement of James Michael Curley. Curley, as I think I mentioned, runs for mayor in 1945 and wins because people have the expectation that Curley can help us get back to work. Now, Curley spends part of his term as mayor in jail. And Curley, by this time, is in his late 70s. He's not in good health. And in fact, in 1949, he loses his bid for re-election to John Hines. I think I've already mentioned this. In the middle of the 1950s, this is just, I'm not quite sure why I'm telling you all of this. Edwin O'Connor, who is the gentleman you see on your right, writes a novel, The Last Hurrah, which is one of the best books written about American politics, as well as the best book written about Boston in the 20th century. And it essentially is the life of Frank Skeffington, who is James Michael Curley. In fact, here is a story. O'Connor was living in a rented room on Beacon Hill, trying to become a novelist. And he wrote this novel because the Beacon Press, which is also on Beacon Hill, had a competition. And you can see the Atlantic Monthly was involved. You can see this novel wins the Atlantic Prize. And O'Connor writes this extraordinary story about Frank Skeffington. And it's one of the great novels. I recommend you all read it. Again, Kathleen, if we were going to have a final exam, I might have had this on the reading list, and you would have to answer questions about The Last Hurrah. The book, I'm not really fond of the movie that was made about it. But anyway, O'Connor writes this book, and the Boston Globe thinks, wouldn't it be a good idea to have James Michael Curley review the book? So they send the book to Curley, and Curley shows it to his lawyer, doesn't read it, gives it to his lawyer. His lawyer says, I think you should sue this guy for libel. So what O'Connor hears is that James Michael Curley, still a powerful figure in politics, is going to sue him for libel. By the way, there's a cautionary tale in here for all of you who want to become novelists. One day, O'Connor is walking past the Parker House, which, as you know, is about a block from where we are sitting right now. And who does he see coming out of the Parker House but James Michael Curley? And Curley gets into a car. And Curley says, O'Connor says, this is my one real chance, sticks his head into the car window and says, Governor, Curley had been governor, so he'd always call him Governor, I'm Edwin O'Connor. By this time, Curley himself had read the book. And unlike his lawyer, James Michael Curley loved this book because it did tell his story. And Curley says, that's a hell of a book you wrote. And do you know what my favorite part is? When I die. And the death scene in the book is really quite dramatic. Okay, so Frank Skeffington, the last of the old Buccaneer politicians, is dying. And there in the room as he's dying is the guy who tells the story, who's his nephew, and some of his old political cronies, and a guy who has never liked him, the nephew's father-in-law. And as the old man who has had this storied career closes his eyes and breathes his last, this guy who never liked him said, well, surely now he knows things differently. And if he knew then what he must know now, that is when he is facing his maker, he would have done things a lot differently. Everyone is shocked because here the guy has just died and this guy is saying, boy, he was so wrong. Now that he is dead, he's seeing God face to face. He would know how wrong he was. Everyone is shocked. Tasteless thing to say if you're standing at someone's deathbed, to say, boy, he really screwed up. But then the body sits up. There's a stirring on the bed. And the old man sits up, opens his eyes and says, like hell I would. And then with a smile on his face, lies back and dies. Curley really liked that. And by the way, Curley lives about 5 more years, and he decides to write his own story of his life, which he called I'd Do It Again. You have The Last Hurrah, I Do It Again. By the way, I Do It Again is actually plagiarized from a book written by a Boston journalist. Curley always complained that journalists never treated him fairly. And so Joseph Deneen, who was a Boston reporter, said, just tell me your story the way you want it told, and I will write it the way you want it told. And so Deneen's book was called The Purple Shamrock. I'm telling you all of this because the Parker House has a restaurant called The Last Hurrah. Until fairly recently, there was a bar near Faneuil Hall called the Purple Shamrock, and a band called the Mighty Mighty Boss Tones has a song, I Do It Again. So you have James Michael Curley fulfilling this cultural promise to Boston. So this is part of the reason for Boston's resilience, though, is not James Michael Curley. It's the fact that he loses in 1949 specifically to someone who wants to undo Curley's whole legacy. And the city government takes a different path than other cities have after Curley, although Curley remains looming large. Okay. Now, John Hines, who succeeds Curley, he defeats Curley in 1949. And by the way, 1949, last time an incumbent Boston mayor was defeated for election or re-election. I'm not quite sure how it's, mayors who have succeeded to the office, the one who has is, of course, Thomas Menino, was elected in his own right shortly after that. Jury is still out. We're gonna have an election this year. Anyway, Hines is really running to create a new Boston. And the new Boston is going to try to turn Boston around from the misgovernment of the Curley years and hope to generate economic growth in Boston, which sounds, it's easier to say than to do. That is, how do you turn a city around? I've just pointed out to all these colleges, and that's fine. The federal government is going to pay people to go to college, and that certainly is one of the driving forces in the Boston economy, and the biotech, which Henry mentioned, is going to be important because there are medical schools attached to most of these colleges. Important thing. But with the idea of the new Boston is to change the nature of city government. So in addition to in 1949, having Curley defeated for re-election, you also have a change in the city charter, eliminating the district representatives on the city council, and instead having people elected citywide on the city council. The idea behind this particular reform, and by the way, I think this particular reform is pretty much a bad idea, is you have people in these neighborhoods who have parochial local interests. What you want to have on the city council are people of the interests of the city as a whole at heart. And that might sound good, but what it does is remove the direct connection that people have with their representatives. And the idea, anytime you have any kind of a reform in the structure of government, it's often sold as a way of getting a better sort of people to be in government. But it's not going to do that. At least human experience has suggested that it won't. Anyway, the pictures you're seeing now are folks who are involved in creating the new Boston. And they actually had a series of new Boston citizen seminars at Boston College. You can see the young fellow behind the microphone is Jerome Rappaport, who was an aide to, Rappaport was, he graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School simultaneously. Extraordinarily bright guy. He's actually still alive. He's in his 90s and still very sharp. And he is one of the guys spearheading the new Boston. And then Reverend C.V. Joyce was the president of Boston College. And then in the photograph at the bottom, you see the Reverend Joyce along with The man in the center is A. Philip Randolph, who was the president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. And the other guy is Thomas Elliot, who was the guy that Curley defeated for Congress back in 1940. Okay, this is one thing. Second thing, and this is big, just like the GI Bill, just as the GI Bill was a federal program to send people to college, you also have in the 1950s, the federal government spending money to build an interstate highway system. Actually, two things are happening, getting a little ahead of ourselves with the highway system, because the federal government after World War II is also going to give money to cities for slum clearance. Of course, no one wants people to live in slums. So the federal government will give money for cities to clear slums. And the long-term expectation is this will give people a better places to live. The short-term thing is what cities are going to do is clear out the low-cost housing and put in higher-end housing as a way of attracting a wealthier tax base who can, we'll get back to this in a minute. We'll start with the highways, even though chronologically they come a little after. So my apologies for the out of sync chronology. The federal government is going to spend money to put in a national highway system. And the real driver of this is President Eisenhower. In the 1920s, when he was a colonel in the United States Army, Eisenhower had been given the task of bringing a convoy across the country, that is driving across the country with a military convoy. And he saw how hopeless this was, because the American road system had developed as a way of getting from one town to the next, not as a way of getting things entirely across the country. That's one thing. That's something that gave Eisenhower the idea, we really need to do something about our roads, because in case of a national emergency, and of course, the Second World War was a national emergency, and then after the Second World War, the United States and the Soviet Union enter into a long Cold War, it really will be essential to have some kind of a transportation infrastructure. Now, the other thing that gives Eisenhower a really good idea about the building of highways is, you know, the American system of building roads, as I said, was to get from one town to the next. And there were some highways, for example, Route 1, which goes from Maine down to Florida, and much of it goes through eastern Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Turnpike is another of these roads that, you know, was built to go essentially from Waltham out to Worcester and then the Massachusetts border. Well, it doesn't go to Worcester, actually. One of President Bolger's lines always was, Worcester, even the turnpike avoids it. If you have, though, if you have two roads meeting anywhere in America, essentially there were two ways of getting them to connect. One was something developed here in New England. Actually, the first traffic rotary in the United States was built on Cape Cod in 1914. I think before this, there hadn't really been a need for these kinds of things because people are going around with horses. But a rotary is one way of getting people to go from one road to another. The other one we had that we really liked was the traffic light. If you have two roads joining, you put up a traffic light. And that's the way American highways operate. In New England, with rotaries, rest of the country, stop signs, traffic lights, and neither one of these is effortless if you are driving. But in his time as the general in charge of the Allied invasion of Europe, Eisenhower came to know a German system for getting people onto highways, and that was an entrance ramp with a lane to enter. This is the way the Autobahn worked, with entrance ramps. So this German innovation, Eisenhower sees during the American and the Allied invasion of Europe, and brings it back to be part of the interstate highway system developed in the 1950s. Okay, now here in Boston, the question always is, so what does this mean to Boston is, to replace Route 1, we are going to build a highway that will go from north to south, and it will be Route 93. And it is going to go through the center of Boston because you're going to be bringing traffic, and it's both for traffic going through the city further south, as well as for traffic or people who are coming into the city. And so this construction begins in about 1953 or so. Here you see a picture of the central artery as it is moving through the area of the financial district. Here, this building is still here. Here you can see the Custom House. Whoops, I went too far. Okay, so you have the Custom House, the tall building you kind of see in the top center. But you can see this is cutting through the downtown area, and massive project. Here it is from a slightly different angle as it is moving. This is actually in the area near Faneuil Hall. And here you see actually these buildings on the right. That is Rose Wharf. This is the Harbor Towers. This is from the 1970s, I believe. We could probably tell by looking at the cars. But the thing you see here, of course, this is not too much off from this image. Traffic was almost always at a standstill. From the time this opened in the late 50s until the time it was taken down in the early 1990s, traffic generally was pretty much stopped because it was less than every third of a mile you had an entrance or an exit ramp. And as you probably know, if you've ever driven on a highway, traffic does tend to tie up at entrance and exit ramps. So traffic here was almost always stopped. That was one big problem with it. And secondly, it cuts off the downtown from the waterfront. It divides the city in a way. So you have this highway built through the center of town, which does really transform the city in ways that aren't entirely positive. But you also have, this is a period, the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. The idea is that we need to build roads because people are getting around by driving. I mean, that's simply a fact. And if you want people to come into the city, they have to have roads to drive on. And so we're going to build roads. You can see here is in the early 50s, the Tobin Bridge built as part of Route 1 over the Mystic River. And you can see actually the postcard calls it the Mystic River Bridge, connecting Chelsea and Boston. This again, massive infrastructure project, not part of the interstate highway system, but again, because the federal government does have an interest in interstate travel, it will help subsidize projects like this. Okay, Mystic River Bridge or Tobin Bridge. And here, another road project was this one. Back at the turn of the century, James Jackson Storrow, the gentleman you see here, was responsible for getting the city and the Metropolitan District Commission to put parkland along the Charles River Esplanade, creating this park along the river. And the river, by the way, the river's bank had been pretty much a garbage dump. So we're really cleaning up the riverbank and making it into this really elegant park. And here you can see the Hatch Shell, where since 1930, the Boston Symphony Orchestra has had summer concerts, or the Boston Pops has had summer concerts, you see sailboats, you see the Salt and Pepper Bridge way off in the distance. You can see the ocean. And in the 1950s, though, our real impetus is not having a nice park along the river. It's how do we get people into town faster? And here you see another picture of the Esplanade. Again, this is a little travel. Well, it's a nice road along it. And then the idea is, let's build a busier road along the riverbank to get people in and out of town more quickly. And thus, the idea is to build a highway into Boston. And this, of course, gets objections from people who kind of like this parkland along the river. So you have these two different ideas, parkland along the river or a way to get people in and out of the city more quickly. Which would you prefer? And among the opponents of the road along the river were the family of James Jackson Storrow. And Storrow had run for mayor back in 1910 against John Fitzgerald and lost, but still, creator of the Esplanade, family not happy with the city taking it to turn it into a road. And so someone has the wise idea of naming the road for Mr. Storrow. So it is Storrow Drive. It takes about a third of the land in the Esplanade. Okay, so you have the building of roads as being an imperative. The other thing I mentioned was the clearance of slums. The federal government will underwrite cities clearing slums because, of course, we don't like people living in slums. And the first slum to be identified for clearance was in the south end of Boston. The area roughly from, let me see if I have a map showing you where this happens. Yeah, so here you can see Albany Street, and this is the bridge over to South Boston. And so you have, actually, no, this is the bridge over the Mass Pike. This building was there until fairly recently, was a taxi company. So Albany Street, this is Berkeley Street here, running here. And you had along this area, buildings that looked very much like this. That is an area that looked very much like every other Boston neighborhood in the South End. And it was also a multi-ethnic neighborhood. Now, the federal government is going to help cities pay to remove people. Most people living in the South End did not own their homes. They were renters. So they don't own the property. And the city doesn't have a requirement to build them. I mean, they're going to have to go somewhere, and the time it takes to build another place. But the thing about the South End is the intention was not to build housing here. Instead, the idea was to make this a light industrial area. And the real driving force behind turning the South End into a light industrial area was one of the newspapers in Boston, the Boston Herald Traveler. And here their newspaper talks about the importance of A, clearing out slums, because we don't want people living in slums. And then B, instead of having this kind of rundown neighborhood right on the edge of the downtown and having businesses like the Boston Herald in their crummy old headquarters on Washington Street, why don't we build a new light industrial area here in the South End and replace these dingy old streets? By the way, the area was called the New York streets because they had names for towns in New York, Albany and Oneida and so on. And so the idea is we'll turn the New York streets into a light industrial area. So this is Albany Street. This is Harrison Ave over here. And then further is Washington Street. And this will become the headquarters of the Boston Herald. And the federal government will help pay for this because the federal government wants to get people out of slums. So as I said, this is a multi-ethnic neighborhood. And one result of this is this gentleman, who is also still living, Mel King, had gone away to college. He went to a college in South Carolina. He's African American, grew up in Boston, which was a predominantly white city, wanted to find out what the African American experience really was like. So he goes to college in South Carolina, and while he's away at college, learns that the city has declared the neighborhood he grew up in to be a slum and is going to remove it and replace it with offices for the Boston Herald and other entities. And this is something he doesn't take well, and he comes to see that actually the people planning this don't have the best interests of the people in the neighborhoods at heart. And it turns him into a lifelong activist for protecting people in their neighborhoods. So also, though Boston isn't finished though with this redevelopment, taking the South End and turning it into a light industrial area, and then secondly, the West End. This is an area also just west of downtown, roughly from City Hall Plaza to Mass General. Here you can see a map of the old West End. Let's see, here is a bit of Hanover Street. Here is North Station. This, I believe, is Cambridge Street. This actually is the north slope of Beacon Hill. This is Beacon Street. So the State House is here. And you can see this is Cambridge Street. Mass General Hospital is here. And so you have this area, like the New York streets, very densely populated. And the city's argument is, you really can't get new modern fire trucks down these crowded streets. And they are crowded, they are narrow. And so here you have this crowded neighborhood, and the city wants to replace it with, these are buildings, each of these is a building. This is parkland. Here is Mass General Hospital. So a big change here in the West End. Again, as in the South End, most of the West Enders rent their houses. And as in the South End, it's a multi-ethnic neighborhood. Each neighborhood has significant populations of African Americans, although they are not by any means a majority, Jews, people from the former Ottoman Empire, Syrians, and so on, and also don't have strong political leadership. We took away the district city councilors. So there are no real advocates for this neighborhood or for the South End. Hence, in the late 1950s, the city, with again federal support, demolishes most of the buildings in the West End. Here you can see the Old West Church, which is still there. Here are the buildings of Mass General. Here is the former Charles Street Hotel. You can see really everything in this area has been demolished. You can see the outlines of the streets here, but we've pretty much removed the neighborhood so that we can build something else. Not for the people who lived in the neighborhood, but for higher end people we hope will move in. I should also say, this particular idea for building cities comes from the French. After the Second World War, France always has been home to people who are very good at coming up with theories as to why we should do things in a certain way. And the new idea emerging in France in the period after the Second World War was that you should separate the different functions of life so that people will live in one place, work in another place, shop in another place. You're not going to have all of these things mixed up because that gets sad and depressing. That's one thing that the French give us, after the Second World War, a theory about city planning. Second, after the Second World War, French architects, some of them, noted actually the great idea emerging in architecture in this period was form follows function. And they loved the idea of functional buildings that weren't trying to be pretty or elegant, but instead were following whatever their function was. And one of the building styles that for some reason really captivated a certain school of French architects was the building style of the pillboxes the Germans had built along the coast of France, built out of poured concrete. And the Germans actually did a lot with poured concrete. And they're very functional buildings. And the word that the French adopt for this particular style is brutalism. And it doesn't mean brutalism in the sense of being brutal. It means it's brutalism in the sense of being strong, because these are strong buildings. So you should build strong buildings and also separate the different functions of living so that people aren't living, working, shopping, playing all in the same place. So what you're going to do in the West End is take out these narrow streets where you'll have shops, and upstairs you'll have people living, and you'll also have factories, places where people are working. You'll separate those things. And instead of having this dense area where people are doing everything at the same time, you'll instead have a place where people who work off in the financial district can, at the end of a long, trying day, come to a high-rise apartment in the West End. Okay, so this is the idea. It's part of the idea here. And the impetus for this lay in the New Boston Committee. And in the 1950s, Boston creates the Boston Redevelopment Authority, or BRA. And here you see the man sitting is John Collins, who is elected mayor in 1959. And standing is Ed Logue, who is a city planner. Again, this is a relatively new position. City planner, someone who can plan cities. And Ed Logue is one of the real master city planners. And here you can see Mayor Collins and Mr. Logue are looking at the city of Boston and the planned redevelopment program. Here you can see the South End. Here is South Boston. This is Roxbury. This is Charlestown, East Boston, the downtown area. And they have plans for redeveloping this entire city, making it really a new city. And if you've graduated from college, one of those colleges I was showing you, with a degree in city planning, and you go to work for the Boston Redevelopment Authority, you really want to do some grand things. You don't just want to monkey around with it or say, gee, I really don't know why I'm here. The city's been here for 350 years. Why does it need me to plan it? So if you are a city planner, you want to show that you're actually doing something. And Mr. Logue certainly was doing things here in Boston. And they're not really done. We'll get back to this in a bit. Actually, we'll probably get back to it next time we meet, because I see we are just about out of time. And I could, of course, keep talking, but I know you all have lives to get back to, so I will let you go. Let me just very quickly see who is here. And are there any questions? No one wants to say anything now. Suddenly the room goes quiet. Okay, well, I will see you. Let me just see, Sonia is here. Gianfranco not here. And I think that is it. Okay, well, I will see you on Thursday. We will continue this story of the building of a new Boston on Thursday, okay?
Bye, Professor.